Hello everyone and welcome to the first game we'll be showing from the Magnus Carlsen Invitational semifinals. It's Magnus Carlsen versus Jan Nepomniachtchi, and this is their third game of the match. First two games ended in a draw and the third one is quite a feisty one. So without further ado, let's check it out and see what this is all about. And it features one of my favorite moves that were ever played, but we're gonna get back to that. So Magnus with the white pieces opens with d4. We have knight to f6 by Jan, we have c4, e6, knight to f3 and d5. So nothing out of the ordinary, just a normal queen's gambit declined. Knight to c3 and now d captures on c4. The Vienna variation, we have e4, striking in the center, preparing e5, and here black goes b5, sort of a modern idea, trying to give up the b5 pawn for the e4 pawn. Nothing's really going on there. So instead we have e5, Magnus chases away the knight, knight to d5, and only now knight captures on b5. So now white grabs the pawn and knight to b6 now, defending the c4 pawn, so white can't really develop easily. We have bishop to e2 and now knight to c6. Nepo just continues developing pieces. We have castles and now bishop to e7. Nepo now ready to castle. We have queen to d2. As you can see, black has some issues in developing this bishop. You could develop it to e3, but Magnus has different plans. So he first starts with queen to d2 and now bishop to b7. We have rook to d1, now the d4 pawn is nicely defended, and here queen to d7. Preparing to castle maybe king side, maybe queen side, also putting some indirect pressure to that knight on b5. So here Magnus just brings it back, knight to c3. Also the knight can now be shifted to e4, it's going to be a very strong piece there, and now knight to b4. So what do you do here? The game has been reached before. It's been played in the St. Louis Rapid Tournament in 2019 between Ding Liren and Fabiano Caruana, where queen to f4 was played by Ding. That game ended in a draw, but here we have a3 by Magnus, and it is only now as of move 13 that we have a completely new game. So the knight being chased away, we have knight to d5, as that was the plan all along, and now comes knight to e4. The knight is now excellently placed, covering all of these squares, not that one obviously. And it's a fine piece. So here, queen to c6, we reach the position from the thumbnail where you can see that the queen and bishop battery could do some serious damage if the trio of knights are, removed from there. So you have to be very careful. We have rook to e1 by Magnus, and now Nepo castles queen side. We have bishop to f1. Tucking the bishop back in for later. Also, the bishop now serves as a nice defender to the g2 pawn, so you don't have to worry about, that. We have f5 by Nepo, now asking Magnus, do you want to move the knight and then allow me some very nice attacking chances with just pushing my pawns, or do you want to capture en passant and allow me to open up the g file? So here e captures, we have g captures. Now Nepo with the semi-open g file he can use for attacking purposes, and now Magnus needs to continue developing somehow, and he needs to get the bishop back, not back, the bishop into the game so he can connect the rooks and well, find some sort of a game plan. One way to do it is queen a5 followed by bishop to d2, but Magnus chooses a different path. He plays queen to e2. Now the bishop will get developed, and now we have king to b8. A nice prophylactic move by Nepo. We have bishop to d2. And now comes rook h to g8. Now, if possible, Nepo wants to double rooks on the g file and create an attack against Carlsen's king. So here we have rook 8 to c1, putting additional pressure on this c4 pawn, and bishop to d6 now. Now asking, do you want to capture? It would be very dangerous to have this bishop remain here. It's a very strong piece. And now it's, well, basically a question, do you want to capture it right away, or do you want to play knight to c5 and maybe allow the capture to happen there? But first, Magnus is in no rush. He's just going to play g3, not allow this bishop to cause any huge problems, and also it will be a nice defender of the rook or rooks that come to the g file. So here f5, chasing away the knight. We have knight captures on d6 now, and c captures on d6. So now Nepo fixes his pawn structure and improves his presence in the center. And although you could capture on e6, it could be a bit dangerous to allow the rooks to occupy that e file. But maybe it can be captured, but Magnus decides against it. Even though the engine does recommend it, Magnus starts with bishop to g2. He puts some pressure along this diagonal, and now rook d to e8. Now Nepo immediately defends it. We have knight to h4 by Magnus, now opening up this bishop's diagonal, and the queen to b5. Nepo gets out of the way. We have rook to b1, defending the b2 pawn, and now queen to b3. So what do you do here? Magnus plays bishop to c3, guards everything here, but he's also trying to sacrifice a pawn. If Nepo accepts this, captures, captures, and captures, then Magnus finally has the open b file. He's going to start with a4, a5. He's going to try and create an attack on the queen side. But Nepo, of course, not interested in this. He does something else. And here, Nepo played a most interesting idea. After Carlsen's bishop to c3, Nepo played knight to f4. And now he's attacking the queen, he's attacking the bishop. There's a double attack on the bishop. This is what I mentioned when I said one of my favorite moves as knight to f4. If you've been following our 1960 World Chess Championship series, where Mikhail Tal challenged Mikhail Botvinnik to the World Chess Championship match, knight to f4 is when it all really started. So knight to f4 by Nepo, and now it's not easy declining this. Your queen is under attack. If you don't accept the knight, you have to move the queen. And for example, if you move it, you're just going to play knight captures, and after knight captures, white will have to suffer, as this bishop along this entire diagonal is just a monster. So instead, after knight to f4, we have g captures on f4. The knight must be captured, and now rook to g4. That was the whole point. The knight is undefended, and there is no way to defend it. So h3. You could go back, of course, knight to f3, it is possible, but then comes knight to d5 or rook e to g8, and there's really nothing you can do here. So instead, Magnus gives it back with style. He plays h3, now forces the trade, but also unpins the bishop. So rook captures, bishop captures on b7, and now king captures. And now queen to f3 with check. We have king to a6, and here Magnus thought, okay, his king is on the run, it's now or never, I have to start an attack. King to h1 is a nice safe move here. a4 is also a very nice move here, but Magnus starts with a very aggressive d5, opens up the diagonal for his dark square bishop, but also it's a pawn sacrifice. So let's see what he had in mind here. Nepo played knight captures on d5, and Magnus now played rook captures on e6, removing the defender of this knight. And he thought, okay, I have the queen, I have the dark square bishop, I have still my rook, which somehow might enter the game. This could be winning. And Nepo says, okay, let's see it. Rook captures, queen captures, and now comes rook to g6 with check. King to f1, and now there is only one move that wins the game for Nepo, so feel free to pause the video and try to find this great idea while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding this, well, idea. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's queen to b5. Queen to b5 is the only move that wins because you have to go into an endgame. Not only that, you have to stop white from achieving some sort of a perpetual checking pattern. Because if you play anything else, for example, you play something like rook captures on f4 or some sort of a move, then queen c6 check, and you are never getting out of checks. Queen b6 check, you're going to block with queen to b6, you're going to get queen to a4 check, king b7, you're going to get checked here. And now again, if you go here, then here, basically white always uses this diagonal to deliver checks. And then, of course, if king to b8, then queen to e8 check. And now if king to c7, then okay, queen to e7 check, you go back, king to b8, queen to e8 check. And then again, you use this diagonal to deliver checks. So this is what you have to avoid. Nepo found queen to b5. This is what he played. And now Magnus does not have any sort of a check here or any sort of a useful check here. And he's going to be forced to trade queens and go into a most unfavorable endgame. So here, rook to d1. Magnus defends the queen. And now Nepo just captures. We have rook captures, and now rook captures on f4, also defending his f5 pawn. Bishop to d4, and now comes rook to f3, going after the h3 pawn with bishop to e3, and now even f4, just chasing away that bishop. We have rook to f5, now with a double attack here. Of course, if you capture the pawn, then the rook is gone. So rook to e6. So what do you play here? Bishop to d4. The bishop needs to move out of the way. So bishop to d4. And now comes rook to e4. Now forcing the bishop to move once again. We have king to g2. A nice in-between move attacking the rook. And rook to d3 now. We have bishop to c3 by Magnus. Now the bishop is safe. But here comes d5 with d4 being unstoppable. and there's really not all that much for Magnus to do here. Rook f6 check was played, king to b5, and now rook to f7, but here just d4. And Magnus needs to play something. He played bishop to b4, and here Nepo played rook to e2, going after the b2 pawn, and he was in this position on move 45 that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game, and Nepo takes the lead in this match. So we'll see what happens in game 4, but Jan has excellent chances here of winning the day 1 as he has the white pieces in the final game. And here you resign, you don't really have a good move here, the pawn cannot be defended, there's not much you can do, you can capture on a7, but then rook captures here, and the two connected pass pawns are simply too strong, and let's not forget black is up a pawn and still up the exchange. So, very, very impressive showing by Nepo. It was basically a drawish game, and Magnus overestimated his chances a little bit, and he was extremely low on time, but Nepo took advantage of that very nicely, and now he is in the lead, and we'll see what happens later on. That's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Klaus Moller-Nielsen, Robert Kiefer, congratulations to Lucas Vollenman for matching, chessboost.com, and Gregory Rosalimo for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Magnus Carlsen Invitational, checking up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.